Welcome to the fourth ICI webinar series. Today, we are going to talk on cardiac CT. Today's team leader is Dr. Priya Chutkar. Today, we have four topics which are going to cover on cardiac CT, namely on the guidelines, when to perform, on stenosis, on plaque morphology, which I think should be the future for cardiac CT, and radiation in cardiac CT. Today, we have an esteemed guest, Dr. Uday Jadhav, who's a cardiologist, fellow from MGM Hospital, Vashi. He is a person who is an ardent learner for cardiac CT. Way back from 2007, 2008, he has been reading cardiac CTs. So he will give his input as a cardiologist to us after each lecture. Dr. Uday Jadhav, I welcome you on the screen dais. Thank you for coming and on this platform to give your time on this. 1 minute of your time.
Thank you very much.
Share with all of us on your thoughts on cardiac CT for a minute, after which I will call on Dr. Priya. Yes, Dr. Uday Jadhav.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hemant. It's been a pleasure. You have been one of our mentors, so as to say, in the city of Mumbai, and there's so much learning. And with Dr. Priya also, her experience in CMRs. This particular heading which you gave, whether it's complementary or whether it should be a competitive art of imaging, it makes sense the way we are looking forward and the way CT coronary angiograms have evolved over the last 5 or 10 years. You see, now we have guidelines that have put the coronary calcium score. Let's look at the NICE guidelines or the ESC guidelines, and probably the Americans will also now adapt it as one of the earliest modality to have an anatomical assessment of atherosclerosis. And if we take a step forward from there and say, where is CT going to lead us now in terms of not purely looking at stenosis, but to look at how the morphology of the plaques are. And also very relevant is the CT-FFR, which may come up in a little better way once it becomes more cost effective over a period of time. And that should be a time frame where it can become truly competitive for an invasive cath lab angiogram. Thank you, Dr. Hemant, once again.
Thank you, Dr. Jadhav. On taking on the same line, the same points that Dr. Jadhav has put, except probably I would not agree with your last line of we being competitive. I think we'll always compliment you moving forward between cardiac CT and catheter angiogram. I think the definition of the exact indications will probably get crystallized as we move on. It took almost 8 to 9 years for the calcium score to come into the guidelines. So I think it is just a matter of a few more years before even cardiac CT probably will have some role. Already it has come in, but slightly much more defined. So let's now go on to the lectures. I would first call on the first lecture by Dr. Parul Garde, who is going to speak on the guidelines for cardiac CT. All lectures are recorded lectures which will be broadcasted. The speakers are available live during the lectures. Please type in your questions in the chat box only so that those can get answered during either, if it's a very simple question, it will get answered there only. Otherwise, that will be taken up during the discussion at the end of each lecture. I call upon Dr. Parul Garde to come on the screen. And Amit, we could have a lecture. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Parul Garde, and we shall be taking a brief look at the role of CT angiogram in the current clinical practice in patients who present with stable chest pain. So all this while, for last almost 25 years, risk stratification and pretest probability models have been the bedrock for deciding the guidelines for those patients who present with stable chest pain. These are the 2010 NICE guidelines. In these guidelines, those patients who had a pretest probability of between 10 to 30%, a calcium score was advised, and only if the calcium score was between 1 to 400 was a CT angiogram performed. For those patients who had a pretest probability of 30 to 60%, functional imaging was recommended, and for those who had more than 60% pretest probability, an invasive catheter angiogram was recommended. There were certain concerns regarding these guidelines. Overestimation of frequency of significant coronary artery disease using the pretest probability method was the first and foremost concern, especially in female population. Minimal use of anatomical assessment was also another concern laid down by various societies, because the anatomical assessment was limited only to two ends of the spectrum: calcium score at one end and invasive catheter angiogram at the other end. Lastly, the appropriateness of calcium score was challenged by the UK Royal College of Radiologists for being a first-line investigation. Besides, it also said that it would be reasonable to perform CT coronary angiogram in the patients who had a zero calcium score. The revised NICE guidelines hence did away with the pretest probability model. Instead, they used clinical assessment to judge the likelihood of coronary artery disease. So based on typicality of chest pain, patients were stratified into those with typical symptoms, atypical symptoms, and those with non-cardiac chest pain. Besides, zero calcium score is no longer recommended to rule out coronary artery disease in those patients who have a low probability of having a significant coronary artery disease. What was most striking in these guidelines was the use of CT angiogram. It said that all patients with new onset chest pain, whether typical or atypical anginal chest pain, would be subjected to CT angiogram using a 64 slice or higher CT scanner. Also, those patients who presented with a non-cardiac chest pain but had an abnormal resting ECG would undergo a CT angiogram. Functional imaging tests were reserved only for those patients who had chest pain symptoms known to have coronary artery disease, and in those patients where a CT angiogram was performed, however, the results were either non-diagnostic or of uncertain clinical significance. Invasive catheter angiogram has been recommended as a third-line investigation only when functional testing is inconclusive. Besides, there have been additional recommendations later in 2017 regarding CT-FFR. It has been termed as a robust and scientifically valid adjunct to CT angiogram. And it has been said that if it is included in the chest pain guidelines, it would further reduce the number of downstream invasive catheter angiogram and would bring down the cost. What forms the basis of these NICE guidelines? NICE guidelines have been formed after carefully studying the clinical effectiveness of CT angiogram and the cost effectiveness of CT angiogram. Clinical effectiveness was studied by meta-analyzing the large cohort trials, which included patients with high prevalence of coronary artery disease. In these patients, there was comparison made between the invasive catheter angiogram and the non-invasive modalities for detection of more than 50% stenosis. And it was found that CT angiogram had a very high sensitivity of 0.96, however, a moderate specificity of 0.79. For cost effectiveness of CT angiogram, it was the overall cost of the investigation was looked at, and the correct diagnosis or the sensitivity of that modality was also looked at, and it was found that CT angiogram had a lowest cost per correct diagnosis. Now, having said this, let's take a look at the European Society of Cardiology guidelines, which have been laid down in 2019. European Society of Cardiology decided to continue with the pretest probability model. However, they modified the model based on more contemporary data. Also, they recommended, like NICE guidelines, that CT angiogram should be used as the initial test for chest pain in those patients where there is a low probability of having a significant coronary artery disease. However, it was subject to, based on availability of the test, based on the necessary expertise. It also said that it can be used as an alternative to invasive catheter angiogram in those patients who had an equivocal or non-diagnostic functional imaging. Now, there has been a more recent expert consensus document on coronary computed tomographic angiography laid down by SCCT, that is Society of Cardiovascular Computed Tomography. It is latest, it has been laid down in 2021. We will just take a brief look at what it has to say. So it says that for the patients who have had a chronic coronary artery disease and have presented with stable chest pain, these are the 3 points I would like to highlight. It says that it is a first-line test for those patients who are not known coronary artery disease but have presented with a stable, typical or atypical chest pain or anginal equivalent. It has also stated that CT angiogram is a reasonable test for evaluating those patients who are known coronary artery disease and have had a stable, typical or atypical chest pain or anginal equivalent. Lastly, it's a reasonable test for evaluating those patients where there has been a non-conclusive functional test. So, this consensus document has been made after studying these points. So, this has been the evidence base for them to come to the conclusion that they have. First is they have studied the diagnostic accuracy of CT angiogram and compared it with the other non-invasive modalities, the prognostic value and a comparison of CT angiogram has been performed with several other functional tests. Randomized controlled trials where CT angiogram has been included in evaluating patients with stable chest pain have been carefully studied. Cost effectiveness of CT angiogram has been taken into consideration. And lastly and most important, the ability of CT angiogram to characterize plaques and evaluate plaque burden and its functional significance when it is accompanied by CT FFR and CT perfusion have also been taken into consideration before bringing out this document. So before I conclude the talk, just a brief look at the two most talked about randomized controlled trials of this decade, that is the SCOT-HEART trial and the PROMISE trial. So both these trials have provided great insight into the point that whether CT angiogram can be included in chest pain care pathways to improve the diagnostic accuracy as well as risk stratification of coronary artery disease. Just a note about PROMISE trial. It included a population size of more than 10,000. It studied the role of CT angiogram versus functional imaging modalities in this population, and the primary outcome was the composite clinical outcome in terms of death, myocardial infarct, or any other major procedural complication. And at the end of 2.1 years, it was found that there was no major difference in the clinical outcome when either of these modalities was used. So, having said this, I would like to conclude by saying that there is a robust evidence base which endorses CT angiogram as a technique for as a first line technique for evaluation of patients with stable chronic coronary artery disease, and it has been incorporated in major guidelines purely because of its following advantages or plus points. It's a test which has a very high negative predictive value and a very high sensitivity in assessment of stenosis. Besides, it's not only a luminogram, it can even evaluate the coronary artery wall and hence can characterize plaques and evaluate plaque burden, which has a major role to play in risk stratification and prognostication of the patients with coronary artery disease. Lastly, there have been added value technologies like CT-FFR and CT perfusion, which along with CT angiogram, have brought about a major improvement in the specificity of this technique. So that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Parul. That was an excellent presentation. We have one question on the chat box, Dr. Uday. It is a clinical question. The difference between the typical or typical chest pain and angina equivalent. We will, if you can take that question.
Right. So the typical chest pain, what we call as the Heberden's angina, is an angina necessarily on exertion. So on walking a decided the chest of a heaviness of the chest need not be a pain at all times and need not necessarily radiate to the left arm and the jaw, though if it radiates, that's helpful. Also, a postprandial heaviness or pain that appears on walking. I think this is something a lot of patients and a lot of clinicians mistake as a digestive problem. That's another good example of a chronic angina or a stable angina. Atypicals is where a patient really points. If he points with a single finger and says, look, here is the localization of my pain, that's very unusual. So may I suggest there is a guideline called OPTA, OPTA guideline, which we have published last year in the Journal of Association of Physicians of India for the physicians to identify what should be precisely angina. I think the OPTA guidelines should be on every table because that really helps us to understand in context. Angina equivalent is where the patient doesn't perceive a pain, but it's more of a shortness of breath. This is more common in diabetics, but need not always be only the diabetics. The elderly also can have angina equivalent in absence of a typical chest discomfort or a chest pain. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Uday. So from the era where we started, where there was no guidelines, where we only knew that cardiac CT is for negative predictive value. That was the main indication for us before the guidelines came in. How do you see as a cardiologist the change in your referral pattern when we started from an era where it is negative predictive value is the only value to an era today where in the guidelines it is mentioned that it could be the first choice of test in any patient with angina or angina equivalent or with an atypical chest pain with an abnormal ECG, do a cardiac CT and check out whether he has disease or not. So when these guidelines came out, how did your perception or your faith on the modality increased, and how did your referring pattern changed?
So, first is, it is still extremely difficult to build up referrals for cardiac CT. The enthusiasm is still not as much, despite both the NICE and the ESC guidelines having put up as a class 1 indication. My belief is that the CT coronary calcium score should be where we should start with very strongly, even for the radiology community. That's the gatekeeper to build up of a cardiac CT. The reason is that if we carefully look at it, most of our coronary atherosclerosis, as we are aware, starts at a much younger age, is much more florid, is not as discrete, and that we tend to pick these patients up much earlier by CT coronary calcium score to start with. You see, the Framingham risk still is probably the best clinical parameter. Though we harp on the ASCVD calculator with the ACC has proposed, it really never works in the young people. Below the age of 45 years, a 7.5% risk, if we consider that as a risk over a period of 10 years, it just doesn't fit into the calculator. We need to look at the lifetime risk. There are two subsets where the ASCVD calculator doesn't work. One, young. Second, women, even above the age of 60 years. So the ACC published their own review of this and showed that it's not working. Now, if we put that in perspective for the Indian community, I think if we build up a CT coronary calcium score, that takes us forward to the cardiac CT. It's only when then clinicians start looking at the calcium and then understanding that cardiac CT is something which is not just a negative predictive value test for a low probability risk. We can build it up and then show that even in patients who have significant disease in the coronary arteries, CT coronary will stand the test of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Uday. One question, Uday. When you say we should start with calcium score, we get referral whereby a patient has got an angina or some kind of an atypical chest pain, clinically not very sure, ECG not guiding us anywhere. And the thought process by the cardiologist is that do a calcium score if it is normal, don't do a CT angio, we will manage medically. How do you look at this thought process where we know that we could have a good plaque burden in these patients who could be responsible for his clinical complaints?
Right. So that brings us to the question as to where we will have a fallacy and we will miss upon significant plaques. One age group that we certainly know now for sure is less than 40 years of age. Less than 40 years of age, you can have a thrombotic coronary artery disease or a microcirculation disease, and the calcium score then can still be 0. If we review the literature and look at what percentage of set of patients have a 0 coronary calcium score and yet have underlying coronary plaques, that goes to about 4 to 5%. So we are still 40 years of age going to pick up significant coronary. It's only in 5% that we are going to miss it. Very significant plaques in about 2.5% of the patient. Now you tell me one test that comes nearer to this. What is it that we try and do? Stress test. SCOTAT is an excellent study. I mean, it talks about two very important aspects, right? It takes CT versus stress test, or let's put it this way, stress test going for a further information by doing a stress echo. That was about 17% patient. They're not very large. And the CT guided entire sort of approach works so very well because that's a 5-year study, unlike PROMISE, which has the lacunae of being a very shorter study. So what are we saying? That you still have CT coronary calciums as the best gatekeeper. Let me share with you, Hemant, something very different. Sometimes what I have been doing is when we get patient with acute myocardial infarction, as they go up to our intensive care unit or when they go to the cath lab, we get their CT coronary calcium score done just to see what's happening. We do nothing else. We don't do a cardiac CT contrast enhance. And then these patients are medically thrombolized or they undergo a PCI, whatever. Here is an interesting point which we should all insist as imaging specialists. When you see a 45, 50 years old gentleman or lady getting hospitalized with acute myocardial infarction, this is what the family says, even from doctor's family. Look, he was perfectly okay 3 hours back. He never had a single symptom all his life. How is it, doctor, that now you are telling us that his LAD has 80% lesion and RC and circumflexus lesions? This just cannot happen because he was asymptomatic till yesterday. And I said, how are we going to answer it? We become so stupid as clinicians standing before them and said, no, it must be exist, and we never picked it up. I look at the calcium score and say, look, had this patient undergone a calcium score 6 months back, you would have already known that he has got a coronary disease. So this is just a little gist. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
So that brings a very important point. Can in the near future, I do not know what that near is, can cardiac CT be a part of a health checkup in a subset of patients, which can pick up a disease when so-called, he was
doing it.
3 years back.
We are doing it in our hospital for our employees. Our employees, they are doing it above the age of 45,
I think that's
50
the problem. Yes. So I think that
yes,
those who have conviction in this modality, those who can know that, where you can totally control the radiation dose with a good machine and the team, I think the conviction is that this is probably going to help us as we move forward in picking up disease before you become symptomatic. But we need more trials, more guidelines on that. Thank you, Dr. Uday, on speaking on this topic and giving your inputs. I will now call upon the second speaker, Dr. Yashpal Rana from Ahmedabad. He will be speaking on stenosis. I invite Dr. Yashpal on the screen dais.
A very warm welcome, all of you. When we convey the report of our CT coronary angiography to our cardiologist colleague, the most important question they ask, is there any significant stenosis? If we say no, most of the times conversation ends there. Yes, indeed, it is an important parameter, but in fact, it is not the only one. Our next biggest challenge is to make sure that we stretch our conversation to convey the plaque morphology as well as the plaque burden. And nowadays, it is indeed gaining the acceptance. Most of the time, CT coronary angiography is advised for its biggest advantage of having high negative predictive value for ruling out the significant disease. And that's why even if when we report there is significant stenosis, it is 100% going to be followed by cath angiography, which is obviously the gold standard technique. The following questions need to be answered when we talk about stenosis on CT coronary angiography. Which methods are available? Which one is better? And what we follow and why in the clinical practice. Now, we have two methods available to measure the stenosis. One is the diameter stenosis, where we measure the minimal luminal diameter. And the second one is measuring the area stenosis, where we measure the minimal luminal area at the site of stenosis. Now, the diameter stenosis can be measured in the longitudinal plane or in the cross section, as shown in this image. In the longitudinal section, where we use the curved MPR images to select the minimal luminal diameter at the site of plaque, and we compare it with the upper and the lower reference points. Second option is to measure the diameter stenosis in the cross section. It is the same plane where we can also measure the area stenosis. Now, the area stenosis has following advantages. Number one is that irregular lumen shapes, which are common at the site of stenosis, at the site of plaques, where the diameter assessment may misrepresent the true luminal narrowing in majority of instances. Number two, it eliminates an important error of selecting an appropriate reference segment. Number three, it has less dependency on viewing angle. And lastly, the important point is that it correlates with the IVUS and the hemodynamic significance of the stenosis. Now, viewing things in such end-on cross-section along with the wall, along with the plugs, these are some of the biggest advantages we have on CT, something which is lacking on cath angiography. But as our results are always compared with the cath report, we must do our measurements the way it is done on cath angio. And hence, in clinical practice, we must follow the diameter evaluation in longitudinal plane, or else there will always be discrepancy between the cath and CT angiography in terms of percentage stenosis. We will always end up overestimating the stenosis. Other point is whether you should use the visual estimate for stenosis or use the automated software. Well, based on your experience, the visual estimates of stenosis, they perform fairly well, especially for the minimal stenosis or straightforward critical stenosis or the total occlusion. There's no doubt about the discrepancy, but sometimes when the lesion causes borderline stenosis, it is the time where I would personally prefer to measure the diameter stenosis manually, as well as take the help of the automated softwares to be the doubly sure that whether the stenosis is significant or not. This is how the semi-automated tools, they work. They select the upper and the lower reference points and compare it with the diameter and the area at the site of plaque. This is how we grade the stenosis qualitatively and quantitatively. Remember, less than 25% is minimal, 25 to 49% is mild stenosis, 50 to 69% is moderate stenosis, more than 70 is severe stenosis. And also remember, for the left main coronary artery, the cutoff of significant stenosis is 50%. Now let's look at the case of mild stenosis. The image on the left side of a CT coronary angiography shows an dense eccentric calcified plaque in proximal LAD with resultant mild luminal narrowing. The cath image on the right side, it confirms the finding of mild stenosis. An example of moderate stenosis, the arrow points to the fibrofatty plaque with a spotty calcification in distal RCA with resultant moderate stenosis. The same findings confirmed on cath images. An example of a tight stenosis in LAD because of the concentric non-calcified plaque, the corresponding cath image on the right side. Another example of tight stenosis in proximal LAD with the corresponding cath image. This is how a stenotic lesion is described on CT coronary angiography report. This much length, concentric or eccentric, non-calcified, calcified or mixed plaque. Try to be precise in mentioning the plaque morphology, which segment of the artery is involved, whether there is involvement of side branch or not. Mention the quantitative grading in terms of percentage stenosis. Remember, always give the range. Don't mention like a specific number like 23% or 56%. Always prefer to give the range. Also mention whether there is involvement of ostia of the side branch or not, whether the stenotic segment is tortuous or angulated in course, and how is the opacification of the artery distal to the stenosis. And lastly, are we perfect? No. we do have some technical limitations on CT angiography. And in fact, we don't want to be the gold standard. We don't want to replace the cath angio, but we need to be as close to the gold standard as possible. And apart from that, we can give some extra relevant information which can have a significance in patient management. Look at the temporal resolution of CT versus cath angio. For cath angio, it is 1 to 10 milliseconds, while even with the fastest scanner, CT has 75 milliseconds. This temporal resolution, it is the ability to see the moving objects very clearly. When there is higher heart rate variability and poor breath hold compliance from patient on CTCA, it results in motion artifacts. That means there is insufficient temporal resolution and we end up underestimating the stenosis. Look at the spatial resolution between the two modalities. For cath angio, it is 0.2 mm, while for CT angio, it is 0.6 mm. And hence, the problem arises when we are viewing the densely calcified plaques, which result in blooming artifacts. And we always end up overestimating the severity of stenosis because of the insufficient spatial resolution. Another important factor is in which plane, with which viewing angle we see the plaque and the stenosis. It is always very important to see the area of stenosis in multiple reconstruction phases and see it from multiple viewing angles and decide the best possible image we have before concluding the final stenosis grading. As we can see in this image, in the ostial LAD, there is predominantly fibrofatty plaque with spotty calcification, and we can see that it is causing mild luminal narrowing. But when we see that lesion from the different angle, from the different point of view, we can clearly see that it is not causing mild luminal narrowing, but it is causing severe luminal narrowing. And as the arrow points in the corresponding cath image, that it is the severe stenosis at ostial LAD. To conclude, we need to see the CT coronary angiography beyond stenosis. The perfect agreement on stenosis to stenosis level of comparison between cath and CT angio is rather unrealistic, and importantly, it is of uncertain relevance for patient outcome. Assessment of calcified and non-calcified atherosclerotic plaque burden, the number of lesions and their location, and the plaque morphology. These are the additional informations on CT which have a strong promise for the superior prognostic impact. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, Yashpal, for a wonderful, lucid presentation, well spoken. Uday, one question I have. You do catheter angio, you do cardiac CT. After you have done a cardiac CT and if you have misreported a cardiac CT and after you correlate with a cath angio, how do you face that challenge of being accurate? You know, when Yashpal was talking about how accurate we should be, how do you tackle such challenges where the correlation is not what we thought it would be?
Right, Hemant. So this is the holy grail in my opinion. This is where everything remains in terms of being complementary or what's going on. So the way I would put it is this, and this is my understanding, and you will give your on this. I will suggest from my experience that it will be always be better to underreport a CT stenosis. You see, it's very important when we look at both the real images. Hemant, am I audible, by the way?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Yes, thank you. So it's important to have a visualized impression and then look at the software and build up the automated software interpretation, put it all together. But here is the extremely important point that I've realized both in my practice as well as from the radiology practice. We tend to overestimate a lesion. So here is what happens. You say this is a significant lesion, moderate, more than moderate or severe, it's let's say 70, 80% lesion. When you advise then the patient to undergo a cath, and in the cath, mind you, I mean, what Dr. Yashpal talked, if you put it the other way, the advantage of a cath is a cine imaging. So when we do a cath, let's say if there is a LAD disease which you have reported as 80% lesion or 75% lesion, and when we do the cath, we look at the cine imaging from all the viewpoints, right? You take the caudal view, both the cranials and a spider view. And then you say, let us in the cath find out which is the most stenosis that I can detect. That's, I think, the difference. And that's where there is a mismatch. As imaging, we overestimate a lesion. Whereas, in my opinion, the best way to go about it is see where you are able to give the lesser quantum of lesion to the patient. So if you see 70s, 75, 80s somewhere, but there in some of the imaging, you see images, you see, no, this doesn't look like 80 to me. This looks like about 60. You are good enough. In the cath, we go the other way around. We try and carefully look that if you see a 50, 60, and it happens because it's a cine image, so that's the beauty of it, that you may find a discrete, very significant stenosis of 80% within all other views would look 60. And therefore, I think this is the vital difference that my hint would be to underestimate on CT so that it doesn't look bad. Because if you refer then a patient to the cath and then the patient says, oh, he referred me for angio and angioplasty, but you are saying this was just a 60%. That's not significant. That doesn't look good, both for a imaging specialist referring to a cardiologist. The other way around, if you have referred a, let's say, 50% lesion in the LAD, 40% in sub, 60% in the RC, and you have sent this patient to a cath and the cath says the CT imaging has said 60%, but no, this is significant. To us, it looks 80%, angioplasty is required. The patient will have no problems against the imaging person, neither the cardiologist, because you have actually helped detect a more precise level of lesion. It's good to under-report than over-report. Thanks.
So here is to my imaging specialist who report, okay? We have to be somewhere near accurate, okay? Now, and the problem, what he has rightly said is that over-reporting, and that has been told to be Yashpal. There are two reasons for this. One is the blooming artifact, which someone asked the question on the chat. That you have to understand is one of the culprits of overestimation. A plaque, calcified plaque in the wall would look protruding into the lumen, causing 40 to 50% stenosis. You please try to understand that. Because of the blooming, it will overestimate. So please be careful when you are interpreting a stenosis, which is because of a calcified plaque. Number two, when you have a non-calcified plaque, because on a cardiac CT, we can see the plaque. When you are seeing the IVUS-like view, you are estimating by area stenosis. Whereas the cath angio is diametric stenosis. So you have to understand that area stenosis is always more than a diametric stenosis. So always think when you're reporting as to how a cardiologist is going to view, and then take a call on how to report, give a range in the range. So these are the two primary reasons why overestimation can happen when you're reporting. One question, Uday. How much use of software, calipers you use to kind of come out of situations when there is a moderate stenosis, when you're in the zone of that 60, where you can eyeball it sometimes to 50, where I can eyeball to 70, when you have taken multiple views?
No, I think it's very important. I think this is a situation. So I'm saying every time that you do the visual and then you do your automated software thing. If there is even a little doubt in terms of a little more precise quantification, and it helps. It helps both in terms of improving upon what you're seeing on visualization to have the lesion a little higher, or sometimes to step it down also, So I think these reconstruction parameters are truly very helpful. And just one addition, that the SCCT has never really asked us to report a 45 and a 50% precise lesion. We have a range. And this is another message that needs to be conveyed to the cardiology community, that a CT has a range in terms of reporting a severity of the lesion. So it's not necessary to report every time a 55% lesion, a 60% lesion. You have the ability to report between 20 to 50, 50 to 70, as Dr. Yashpal explained. I think that's something also we need to take a little forward. So then you are okay with it. Thanks.
Okay, last comment only before we switch on to the next speaker. I think whenever we are in that zone of moderate stenosis, when we are not sure whether it's more towards 70 or more towards 50, I think CT-FFR is going to bail us out. That's something which is going to help us a lot in the future to decide these moderate lesions, whether they need to go for a cath or not. Of course, there are limitations of calcifications, presence of heavy calcifications, and quality of image is also there. But I think that's somewhere where the next level of kind of accuracy will happen once CT-FFR comes into the clinical practice. It is already there, but it's not available because of the cost, as Uday pointed out. Thank you, Yashpal, for your wonderful lecture. I will now call upon Dr. Nilay Nimbalkar from Nagpur. From his busy schedule of in the Corona times, he has, thank you, Nilay, for coming and giving a valuable time for this particular webinar. He is going to speak on very important topic, which is probably going to be the future of how we will contribute to the treatment paradigm along with the cardiologist on plaque morphology. I invite Dr. Nilay on the screen dash. All over to you, Nilay.
After much information about the indications and guidelines by Dr. Parul Garde and short, extensive and comprehensive assessment of stenosis indices by Dr. Yashpal, this is a time to look after a golden tool in CT coronary angiography, plaque morphology. I am Dr. Nilay Nimbalkar from Precision Scan and Research Center, Nagpur. Good evening to all the esteemed panelists, ISCI office bearers, president, secretary, and my dear friends. Whenever we are talking about coronary angiography, catheter coronary angiography scores over the stenosis assessment, but CT coronary angiography gives us comprehensive assessment about the stenosis as well as the plaque characters. Whenever we are talking about CT coronary angiography, we can see the vessels throughout its extent. We can see whether there is multiple plaques, which are soft plaques or calcified plaques, or there is complete significant stenosis in any of the vessels. Based on the postmortem studies, 2/3 of the acute MI are caused by rupture of vulnerable plaques. And if you want to classify vulnerable plaques, Stone et al. Has given us an alternative or a more comprehensive definition about the vulnerable plaque, as it is a plaque that places a patient at risk of future major cardiac event or MIS. So whenever we are identifying a plaque as a vulnerable plaque, we should know that pathologically this is a thin cap fibroathoroma which is having central lipid-laden content, which is loaded with macrophages, which is loaded with inflammatory tissues, which is loaded with hemorrhages, and having a thin cap of fibrous tissue surrounding it. So we have to have modalities to see how this thin cap fibroathoroma looks. The best possible modalities what we have right now are the invasive modalities, which are IVUS or optical coherence tomography, or near infrared spectroscopy. These are actually having additional tool at the tip of the catheter, like a piezoelectric crystals, and then putting these catheters into the vessel to see the vessel lumen. But these invasive techniques have their inherent lacunae because they cannot pass beyond a part of stenosis, they cannot go beyond the vessel which is stenosed, and they cannot evaluate the vessels completely. Plus, they are invasive and less universally available. So we have to have some non-invasive technique which are available throughout to evaluate the vulnerable plaques. These are CT coronary angiography, PET CT, or MRI. When we discuss about the non-invasive techniques, the CT coronary angiography scores over the FDG as well as the MRI because it characterizes the plaque more comfortably as close to that of the thin cap fibroathoroma by identifying lipid core, by identifying the remodeling as well as spotty calcifications. So whenever we are discussing about a plaque, we should not only discuss about whether it's a soft plaque, whether it's a partially calcified plaque or a calcified plaque, but we must discuss about its characters which are indicating vulnerability of that plaque. So when we are talking about vulnerable plaques, we should know whether the plaque is hypodense plaque, if it has spotty calcifications, if it is causing positive remodeling in the vessel, whether it is showing napkin ring appearance, or it is having significant plaque load in that particular vessel, causing severe areas of stenosis in the vessel. When a hypodense plaque, we should have some characters which can define that, yes, this plaque is a hypodense plaque, not only by appearance, but by its Hounsfield values. A plaque having Hounsfield value of less than 30 HU is called as a hypodense plaque. That 30 Hounsfield value indicates that it is having lipid content at the center of it. When we say a spotty calcification, it is a good indicator for vulnerable plaque, but a spotty calcification has to have few characters. What are those characters? It is less than 3 millimeter in size, having HU value of more than 130 HU, and then it has to be surrounded by hypodense plaque. So a calcification which is centrally placed in a hypodense plaque is called a spotty calcification, not along the exterior of the vessel wall. So a plaque or a calcification which is 2 millimeter in size, which is surrounded by hypodensity, is called as spotty calcification having HU value of more than 130 HU. Positive remodeling is a better predictor for vulnerable plaque because it is not dependent on the HU values. HU values are predominantly dependent on multiple factors. So whenever we are characterizing a soft plaque or a hypodense plaque, it is dependent on the KV which we are using. It is dependent on the amount of contrast which is present in the vessel. It is dependent on the kind of contrast which we are given. But positive remodeling is not dependent on the HU values because we can directly measure the positive remodeled vessel. Whenever we are measuring it at the level of the plaque, how much is the vessel diameter proximal and distal to the vessel, and compare these. If it is more than 1.05 to 1.1 times the normal or the normal vessel diameter, then the vessel is called to be positively remodeled. Now there is another method by which we can identify whether the vessel is positively remodeled or not, and that is by calculating the area of the lumen as well as area of complete vessel wall. Many times there can be few fallacies because the outer part of the plaque may not be well visualized. Whenever we are using lower KV values, this outer plaque wall may not be well visualized and then hampering the area calculations. So whenever we are calculating the positive remodeling, diameter as well as area methods both can be used. Napkin ring is a very important sign in identification of vulnerable plaque. It is actually a dense surrounding plaque with a central hypodensity which is closer to the lumen. The density along the periphery of the plaque can be because of the fibrous containing plaque wall, or it can be because of the inflammation which is happening in the vessel, or it can be the proliferation of vasa vasorum. These are different theories which are going on. But the important part is that some inflammation is going around in the vessel wall, which is causing increased density along its periphery. The plaque is having central lipid core, which is closer to the lumen, that giving appearance the ring, the density as a ring of the napkin ring, and the central hole as the hypodense plaque, which is more towards the vessel lumen. So napkin ring sign closely matches the thin cap fibroathoroma stage of the plaque, and that's why it has significant importance. When the vessel is loaded with plaques, soft or calcified or partially calcified or vulnerable plaque, then definitely chances of that patient having acute coronary syndrome in the particular territory is more, because more the plaque load, more is the chance of acute coronary syndrome. Similarly, significant narrowing increases the chance of patient having acute coronary syndrome in that uh, distribution. First, because of the stenosis, and second, if there is vulnerable plaque proximal to it and it ruptures, it causes sudden obstruction of the small lumen, which is at the level of stenosis. So we have seen multiple characters like spotty calcifications, positive remodeling, but there has to have a method which can automatically calculate the volume, the area, and characterization of the plaques. Few vendors have developed such method. Plaque ID is one of them by GE, where they can calculate the amount of plaque which is present in particular given length of the vessel, and then they can characterize it to a soft plaque, fibrofatty plaque, or a calcified plaque in different ways. This method still needs some refining, but definitely in future this can be of a great help. This is a wonderful example. So this is a chart which has given, this is the normal lumen. This is a non-obstructive patients having no adverse plaque, as well as few patients having adverse plaque. And these are the areas which is showing obstructive lumen having no adverse plaque. Here adverse plaque means the vulnerable plaque, and these are the patients having vulnerable plaques. So if we compare non-obstructive lumen having vulnerable plaques with obstructive lumen having no vulnerable plaques, so the patient having vulnerable plaques without significant obstruction has similar morbidity or chances of having myocardial infarction to that of obstructive lesions. So it is always considered that the vulnerable plaque as well as the obstructing areas both carry equal significance if we consider myocardial infarction in those patients. So based on the postmortem study, what we have initially seen that 2/3 of the acute MI are caused by rupture of the vulnerable plaque, and that's why we infer that we must characterize the plaques as vulnerable and non-vulnerable, pen it down in every report with description about all its characters. It has equal importance in patient management with the stenosis. So when we have few questions, why the vulnerable plaque is not getting so much importance, I would like to ask our esteemed panelists. When CT report says that CADRAD 2 to 4 with vulnerable plaque, how much value a cardiologist gives to the vulnerable plaque comment which we have given? Second, does it help you in better treatment modifications? And third, how do you feel a vulnerable plaque reporting should be to make it more clinically relevant? Terkar sir, I would like to ask these questions
Yeah, I
to
think
the
I
panel.
did it.
Thank you.
Right, Uday. I think you can take over from the questions are on the board. So the very first thing is, how do you look at the report where you find the radiologist reporting that there is a vulnerable plaque?
I think that's something excellent. If the radiologist adds, the imaging specialist adds those comments, particularly the 4 criteria which have been described, right? The low attenuation plaque, the spotty calcification, napkin ring, and the remodeling. The point is, if we go back to the cath and then look at it, if there is just one plaque being reported of that variety, that's something very unusual. On cath, you do find other lesions also. So it's important to also look at not just one characteristic, but more than one characteristic being present in the same patient. For example, a remodeling, a positive remodeling is often seen even on imaging. So if we look at the proximal and distal part to the segmental stenosis we report and look at it carefully, because that is attenuated area, then along with a napkin ring, we may be able to identify a remodeling of the vessel, and that's something extremely important. So yes, if this has been reported, how does it help us change the patient's therapy? In terms of intervention, yes, these plaques have to be addressed. They have to be addressed. And fortunately, the statin therapy is now a high intensity therapy. So I guess that's one indication where a high intensity statin certainly makes a huge difference in terms of stabilizing of plaque.
Fine. So if vulnerability of the plaque has been mentioned by the imaging specialist, it could probably help you to decide on the statin therapy, is what you are suggesting from your from what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely.
Any suggestions as a cardiologist, in what form do you want the plaque burden to be presented to you? Number one, you said one lesion you see and we see many. So is there a thought process by you as a cardiologist as to how do you want the radiologist to put the plaque burden to you, which will be very specific? It should not be too much of description, but a particular manner in which would make it easy for you to immediately understand and take a call. Any suggestion, any thought process on that?
Right. So the automated software or the imaging I was understanding more. But I guess to the cardiologist, if you are report a PXC already requiring a cath, if we go vessel wise and say, what is the plaque burden we are seeing there in terms of either vulnerability or overall, and simplify it, and particularly look at these 4 established characteristics. So we always have to concentrate on these 4 established characteristics and say, look, in this vessel, the other one and the other one, this is what we have found. Then it truly helps. So we can comment on that as additional information. It's not that we are stepping out too much beyond our shoes and saying, okay, so this is how it looks, this is the vulnerability. But yes, once you have finished the conventional report, then we say, here is the additional information on the plaque burden. I think that would be really, really excellent. This is just a great.
Great. Thank you. I think this is where the future is going to move, and probably we don't have proper guidelines as to how should the treatment change depending upon the degree of vulnerability plaque or the degree or the plaque burden when you're talking. So can we talk of a burden of a vulnerable plaque? I do not know whether that's the right term, but probably that's what comes to our mind is, can there be a kind of a scoring to tell them as to what should be the burden of the vulnerable plaque? Will that help? And if it helps, what is the guidelines for the treatment? And really, does it make a difference to the endpoint? Thank you, Uday, for the wonderful input on that. Now we go on to the last lecture by Dr. Priya Chudgar, the team leader for this whole webinar series. Dr. Priya, I invite you on the screen dais. Her topic will be on radiation dose. I remember, Uday, when the first REF, along with Bhavin, when we started speaking about cardiac CT, radiation dose, I told him to put as one of the talk, because I think it was something which we all had to be accountable for. I'm not saying that we are giving them more, but we have to be accountable. I was put as a last lecture on the second day, on a Sunday, at 4 o'clock in the evening. From that time, it has changed to each imaging specialist being accountable to how much of KV, how much of MAS, and what is the radiation component he's giving. So I think Dr. Priya has made a wonderful presentation on how accountable we should be towards our patient. On to you, Priya.
Hello. Till now, we have seen that coronary CT angio is a very powerful diagnostic modality for the diagnosis of coronary artery disease. However, the radiation hazards with coronary CCTA has been a major concern in wider application of this technique. So let us clear some facts and myths about radiation hazards. First thing is about the radiation doses. The dose can be either physical dose, which is actually measured from the CT machine, or the biological, that is effective dose, which is hazardous to patient's body. Different radiation dose parameter. It can be either CTDI, that is computed tomography dose indexed, that represent the average dose within the scanned volume. It is measured in milligray and it is influenced by exposure settings like tube KV, current, pitch, etc. DLP, that is the dose length product, is basically CTDI multiplied by scan length. CTDI and DLP are always seen in the score report card, which is there, which is available at the end of every exam. Effective dose or the biological dose is calculated using DLP multiplied by a tissue-specific conversion factor. You have to make sure that you use an ideal correction conversion factor as per the recommendations, and approximate conversion factor for the CT angio is 0.023 to 0.028. The effective radiation dose, that is the weighted sum of doses exposed to organs and tissues according to the risk of health detriment, and that is measured in sieverts or millisieverts. Different radiation sources. No radiation is safe, but however, there is radiation even in the natural background, prolonged mobile usage, or even air flight. From the medical imaging perspective, the radiation imaging dose for a CT coronary angio, it is highly variable. It can range from 2 to around 12 to 14 millisieverts. The catheter angiography approximately gives radiation of 5 to 7 millisieverts. The radiation-induced cancers are the data that is extrapolated based on the Japanese bomb survivor. This radiation-induced carcinogenesis is a stochastic effect. So basically, it is a random occurrence like DNA mutation and not dose related. The lifetime attributable risk of a cancer from a single CCTA exam is negligible. However, still no radiation is safe. Children are more susceptible to radiation. Hence, study should be always justified and radiation dose also should be minimum as much as possible. Before the study, we have to see the risk-benefit ratio and then perform the study with the various dose reduction strategies. This can be related to patient preparation, using the right set of protocol, the right machine for the clinically appropriate indication. Good heart rate control, that will give you the better quality and also significantly reduce radiation dose. Patient compliance, explaining the patient about the procedure, that will improve the cooperation of the patient, and also the re-exam will be avoided. Technique can be modified using the low KV protocol, correct positioning of the patient, using the optimal scan range and FOV. Machine parameters like prospective gating, high pitch, ECG gated tube current modulation, all these will also significantly reduce the radiation. Let us go through some strategies. First thing is scan range. The ideal scan range for a CT coronary angio is, as seen on the scout, is below the carina till the base of the heart. You don't have to scan more than this, and depending on, like for example, bypass protocol, there will be a wider scan range, but not to overscan the patient. Because if you minimize the scan range, reduction of 1 centimeter length, even you can achieve dose saving of nearly 1 millisieverts. Heart rate control, that will improve the image quality, but also reduce the dose. As you see over here, 60 beats per minute, 60 to 65 beats per minute will be an ideal heart rate, which will be significantly reducing the radiation dose as well. ECG gated tube current modulation. This technique basically uses the high MA only during the diastole or the phase of acquisition. Rest of the scan is scanned with a minimal radiation dose. So instead of constant MA, we have this tube current modulation. And this technique has effectively reduced nearly 47% radiation reduction in the effective dose. Prospective axial scanning. Prospective scanning scans only during the diastole or the required phase of the cardiac cycle, and that will the radiation is on only for a minimum time with some amount of padding before and after the scan, and it can achieve nearly 50 to 85% of dose reduction. However, in prospective gating, basically these are non-overlapping adjacent slices. You require a very low and regular heart rate, and only selected phase is available. So the reconstructions after the scan is over is not possible. And also the functional information cannot be provided. It will significantly reduce the heart rate, significantly reduce the radiation dose, but it is possible only with low and regular heart rate. Retrospective gating, basically that means a continuous volume coverage throughout the cardiac cycle. Images can be reconstructed later on, and it can also provide information about the cardiac function. Since multiple phases are possible, you can avoid the re-exam even if the study quality is suboptimal. So you have to look for the advantage and disadvantage of both the modality, and then you plan your exam. Another important technique is low kV technique. In non-obese individuals, reducing kV to 100 has reduced radiation dose to nearly 31% without significant compromise in image quality. From the post-processing point of view, iterative reconstruction, that is a post-processing algorithm that will compensate for the noise from the lower dose acquisition without compromising the image quality. Newer generation machines like 320 detector scanners and a dual source CT scanners. They have a high pitch and even a single heartbeat scan is possible. Most importantly, we have to have the patient-tailored approach. Using the appropriate right indication, correct protocol, optimal scan range, low heart rate, 100 kV technique, good operator technique with proper guidance and avoid re-exam, you can achieve significant reduction in radiation dose. So it is not only the scanner, but how you use it that makes a difference. As you see over here, with single heartbeat or a newer generation 320 slice or dual source, even a CT angio gives radiation of 1 to 2 millisieverts. Prospective gating has also significantly reduced radiation dose. But apart from that, using 100 kV of less than 60 beats per minute and ECG gated tube current modulation, all these factors have made it possible that CT angio with ECG gated modulation, you can achieve a significant reduction of radiation as compared to diagnostic angiography, catheter angiography. So finally, to conclude that limiting radiation dose is an important goal for the imaging community. We should have the careful selection of CT scanning protocol and a patient-tailored approach. We need to keep radiation exposure as low as possible, as low as reasonably achievable, ALARA concept. However, misguided concern about the low dose carcinogenic risk should not hamper the justified and correct use of this technique. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya, on the wonderful presentation. One question to you then. Has it ever stopped you from referring a patient to a cardiac CT because you have radiation in mind?
Oh, there is some problem. Oh God. Okay.
We can hear
How
you,
do we
Dr.
manage
Uday.
this?
Should I repeat the question for you?
You are audible, Dr. Uday.
Oh, am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Yeah, what is the question?
Yeah,
Please,
the
if you
question
may
is,
repeat.
have you ever stopped a patient from going to a cardiac CT because you have radiation in mind?
Because of radiation concerns? yes, sometimes if you have obese patients, really obese patients, and you know you're going to radiate them a little more, maybe inadvertently or advertently, in order to improve your imaging quality, then you may want to think and say no. But from what I understand from the talk, and here is my view on this, that in the cath lab, generally we give about 2.1 to 4 millisieverts, but a cath lab radiation can exceed 5 to 7 if more views are taken. And unconventional views like doing a lima-rima every time and doing a renal shoot. So you see, the Europeans don't ask you to do that anymore in the cath lab. So then only you can reduce the radiation. Otherwise, I think the current era of generation of machines give very low radiation, and it's absolutely okay. And the other important thing is letting people know that the calcium score, SCCT, accepts a 0.5 to 1.5 as the lower and upper limit. And generally speaking, 0.7, 0.8 millisievert is very, very low. Actually, the cardiac CT may give a radiation which must be as good as the CT abdomen plane and contrast enhanced. So I don't see any more radiation being a big issue. The way Dr. Priya explained, a lot of things can be done in radiation lower. Thank you.
Absolutely. So the point is, be accountable to what you're doing, and I think whatever information we have in literature makes us accountable to give the right dosage to the right size of the patient and the right coverage. If that is taken care, I think we are in the safe zone, and I don't think we need to worry on that. Thank you, Uday, for giving your time to this webinar. Thank you, Dr. Priya, for running such a wonderful
Thank you very much.
webinar.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just
My
last,
pleasure.
before
Thank
we
you.
sign out, next webinar series will be on amyloid. It will be on cardiomyopathy, amyloid cardiomyopathy. So please everyone register for the same, and I see you next month. Thank you, team. Before we sign off, can everyone come on the screen dial so that we can have a small screenshot as a memory for the same?
I'm really sorry. My video has stopped. Thank you.
No problem. Your name, we'll take it as a name. Only a name, you can give it as a.
Dr. Noori was here. Sir, you should have joined for the discussion. Your comments? Sir, can't hear you. You are not audible, sir.
Sorry, there is no time now. We can discuss later on.
Fine. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone. Good night.